behalf of our colleagues and collaborators at Harvard's Ukrainian Research Institute, as well as the Kyiv School of Economics, I want to welcome you to the inaugural session of Kyiv Connection, a new four-part virtual event series devoted to featuring compelling and contemporary conversations about Ukraine. Today's event is entitled, How Will AI Disrupt Societies, and Can It Help Ukraine? So I will now yield the floor to my colleague, Dr. Alexandra Vakru, who is currently serving as the Vice President for Strategic Engagement at KSE during her leave of absence from the Davis Center, where she has long served as our Executive Director. So Alexandra, I turn the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. It is a special pleasure for me to bring together three of my favorite institutions, the Kyiv School of Economics, the Davis Center, and Harvard's Ukrainian Research Institute, in this series that we're calling Kyiv Connections. And what we're trying to do with this series is take some of the larger disciplinary debates that scholars are having and think about how the research that's being done there is related to or has an impact on or can be helpful to understanding what's happening in Ukraine. So the series will feature conversations with scholars from different disciplines. And the first one we're doing is sociology today. We're doing history next month and most likely political science the month after that. But today's discussion is indeed, how will AI disrupt societies and can it help Ukraine? We're going to have two esteemed scholars with us. The first is Dr. Tymofii Brik, Sociologist and Rector of the Kyiv School of Economics, and he will be in conversation with Dr. Nicholas Christakis, the Sterling Professor of Social and Natural Science at Yale University. They're going to talk about how artificial intelligence, or AI, will improve or disrupt our societies, which touches on a critical debate in Ukraine, which is dealing with a labor shortage and the demographic impact of the war. Can AI be used to compensate for the loss of human capital, or should we be wary of its disruptive power? I'm going to start by introducing our two scholars, and then I'll turn the discussion over to Tymofii. But let me say, if at any point you have questions for either of our interlocutors, please put it in the Q&A section. Dr. Nicholas Christakis, MD, PhD, MPH, is Sterling Professor of Social and Natural Science at Yale University. He's a sociologist and a physician, and his research focuses on social networks and biosocial science. His current research is focused on two topics. First, the social, mathematical, and biological rules governing how social networks form, connection, and two, the social and biological implications of how they operate to influence thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, or contagion. His lab uses both observational and experimental methods to study these phenomena, exploiting techniques from sociology, computer science, biosocial science, demography, statistics, behavior, genetics, and evolutionary biology, epidemiology, and other fields. Actually, we could have you speak in all of these conversations, Nicholas. Tymofii Brik is the rector of the Kyiv School of Economics. Since 2018, he's been teaching and conducting research in the field of sociology, including on the sociology of religion, social research methods, network analysis, and identity. Since 2021, he's also been the national coordinator of the European Social Survey, or ESS, in Ukraine, an international comparative study that's been conducted in most European countries since 2002. Gentlemen, over to you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for this introduction. I feel I will take the virtual floor now to moderate the conversation. I also want to say that, I'm very happy and very excited for this partnership with Huri and Davis Center. These are key institutions that have supported Kyiv School of Economics, and they're very proactive in promoting the conversation and a dialogue about Ukraine and the region. And I hope that our virtual meetings will be very productive and they will help wider audiences to understand what's happening in Ukraine and beyond. And today, even though Alexandra introduced Nicholas already with all his credentials, I want to say a few more things. That Nicholas is my favorite sociologist. When I teach sociology to students in Kyiv, I actually put it in my syllabus that they have to watch a YouTube video on Big Think, where Nicholas talks about sociology and agency and social structure. So it's a very great video, and I advise everyone to watch it. And Nicholas Christakis has supported us, Kyiv School of Economics, a lot with his time and expertise. He has been on the advisory board to some of our surveys that investigate psychological conditions of kids in Ukraine during the war, and he has given lectures to our audience in the very first weeks of the invasion. So I'm very grateful to Nicholas for all his support, and this is a small opportunity to express this gratitude. So thank you, Nicholas. And for the actual conversation, I wanted to structure this dialogue that I can ask a few questions that are very broad, that touch the concept of artificial intelligence. Then I will ask a few questions about your most recent research, and then we'll ask some questions about Ukraine. So with this introduction, I'll just start with this first question. And I know I followed your career, I followed your trajectory, so I know that there was a moment in your life when you was a physician, but then you realized that health is also a social phenomenon, that support between people and social contacts and ties between people are very important, and that's how you switched to study social ties and social support and social networks. And I know that now you study artificial intelligence. So people interact not only with other people, but also with a new type of intelligence, artificial intelligence. And my question is a kind of broad one, but I think it can be important for our community to know what you think, whether is it going to be a new stage in your career when you turn to this new paradigmatical shift that the studies of artificial intelligence will become as important as social network analysis in our field, or do you think this is just a trend that will eventually fade away like some other sociological endeavors? So please.
Well, thank you, all of you, for having me, and Tymofii, thank you so much for the opportunity to work with KSE and some of the work that you're doing for civil society in Ukraine, and also in recognition of the awful war that Russia launched. I remember, I think our first conversation, you had to go get in your bathtub or something when the building was being bombed. And yes, there's been a certain intellectual trajectory that I have taken. I'm not sure how interested the readers would necessarily be in how I started in medicine and was a hospice physician, and then how I became interested in terminal care and how to take care of people who are dying. And I spent many years as a doctor, clinically active, taking care of people who are dying. And then I became interested in the widowhood effect, how when one person dies, it increases the risk of death of their partner, which also obtains in wartime, by the way. So there are these ripple effects, these cascade effects of mortality when one person dies upon the people they're connected. And at some point, I began to think more broadly about the widowhood effect, is that it was a special case of networks more generally. This was about 25 years ago. And my mind was sort of open to the pattern of social networks that we all exist in, these elaborate, ornate, beautiful structures that we humans naturally are predisposed to make. These social networks, many listeners will now conjure an image of a network in their mind, and then we proceed to live out our lives within these networks, and our fate in life depends on it. For example, we all just traversed the COVID pandemic. Whether you got exposed to the germ or not, and when you got exposed, depends on where you are in the network, because germs move through these networks. Information moves through these networks. Money moves through these networks. Violence moves through these networks. Behaviors and norms move through these networks. So really, for the last 25 years, this has obsessed me, and we've had a program of research, multiple programs of research in my lab, looking at the social implications of our constructing these networks, the evolutionary biology of these networks, like the genomics of these networks, and as you alluded to, most recently, the role of AI in these networks. And let me just give a quick toy example to fix listeners' ideas about what we're interested in. So we're broadly interested in social interactions, human social interactions, what my lab does. Everything from the biology to the sociology to the psychology to the computational aspects, the AI aspects. So here's the toy model. The manufacturer of an Alexa, a digital assistant, when they make that device, is very concerned about the human-machine interaction. So they optimize the device so that the purchaser of the device, just like the purchaser of an autonomous vehicle or all kinds of AI-enabled technologies, The machine is optimized for you, the user, the owner of that machine. For example, you don't have to say to the machine, very politely, you don't have to say, "Excuse me, Alexa, I'm very sorry to interrupt you. If you don't mind, would you please tell me the weather tomorrow?" This would be an absurd level of politeness that no one would ever buy a machine that you had to, bow down to and be so obedient and, polite to. You expect to be able to say, "Alexa, weather," and the machine responds. And many scientists have been studying human-machine interactions and how the nature of the machines, for example, whether they're humanoid or not, whether they move their bodies or not, if they're humanoid robots, how they speak, and my lab has done some of this work too, how that affects the humans who own or interact with the machine. But here's the thing about the Alexa example. When you bring that Alexa into your house, your children speaking to the Alexa learn to be rude. And when they go to the playground, they are rude to other children. So the introduction of the machine into this system changes human-human interactions. And that's what my laboratory is interested in. We're not interested in human-machine interactions. We're interested in human-human interactions in the presence of machines, in what we call hybrid systems of humans and machines. Hybrid because there are two kinds of entities. The artificial intelligence endowed entity, whether it's an inanimate bot online, like the Russian bots, for example, that spread propaganda, or a humanoid robot, like a physical robot, like you might find on a factory floor, for example, or a companion robot to elderly people, for example. So there's a hybrid system of humans and machines. And what's important about this specific case of AI is that these machines act on a level playing field as if they were human. So the kind of AI that I'm interested in is not the super advanced AI, for example, that we might use to predict protein folding, and not, for example, the kind of AI we might use in warfare drones to do image processing. I'm interested in forms of AI that take the place of some part of human functionality and interact with other humans as if they were human, and how that in turn affects the broader social order. And my laboratory, beginning in 2017, has started publishing multiple papers on this, how the introduction of forms of artificial intelligence into human groups reshapes the performance of those groups.
Yeah, it's fascinating, but it also reminded me about some more conservative traditional interactions in the household. Suppose you have an animal, and sometimes people are not polite with pets and animals, so I wonder to what extent it's different from interacting with artificial intelligence. But to ask...
No, but actually it's interesting because there's a whole tradition in robotics of HRI, human-robot interface, or human-robot interactions, and they actually explicitly use pets as a model. So there's research that's been done on how humans interact with their pets, and they say, well, to what extent are robots just like pets? To what extent are they different than pets? This is a little tangent. I don't know if we'll come back to it, but one of the things that's different about robots, compared to humans, by the way, is that they don't smell. They don't have an odor. So when we interact with other people, of course, we use auditory and visual cues, and robots can emulate that. But one of the ways that they don't emulate is they don't emit odors, and we don't smell the robots. And my laboratory, in a different line of work, which we probably won't talk about today, is beginning to think about human olfaction and chemosignaling, how human beings have particular odors and how other humans can detect those odors. Anyway, that's a tangent. But yeah, pets. But pets have odors, so we smell our pets.
That's fascinating. And I want you to elaborate a bit. You already mentioned these examples of artificial intelligence that maybe is not so sophisticated as drone, but still is interesting enough for you to model interactions between people. I know that you refer to these types of artificial intelligence as sometimes as smart or dumb, or maybe simple and complex. Can you elaborate on these conceptual differences? Can a smart AI be simple or not? So can you give us a taste of what you're working with?
Yeah, so we, in my lab so far, we have not been working with large language models as a system or some of these other very sophisticated. artificial intelligence systems. We've been primarily working with very simple forms of programming, what we call dumb AI. And we've been doing this for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is that I'd like to not swim with sharks. So I tell my young scientists in the lab that, when you swim with sharks, you sometimes get eaten. And there are lots of very, billion-dollar funded labs that are working with super smart AI systems, and we can't hope to compete with that. So let's avoid them. Let's do our own thing. And furthermore, what we're interested in studying is not optimal programming of the AI systems, which is of less interest to me, although it's a profound and deep topic. It's of less interest to me because that is changing month by month. Even ChatGPT 4 has now been outdated. And I think anything you publish about the system will become obsolete within a year or 2 years. But human beings don't become obsolete. Our behaviors have been shaped over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. And so what I'm interested in is studying the human response, which is invariant, or at least the determinants of the human response are invariant, to the system, whatever it is. So I can afford to use very simple examples of AI, very simple systems, because I'm studying the people. And finally, these forms of artificial intelligence we study, and I'll give an example in a moment, what we call dumb AI, they can afford to be dumb precisely because they are mixed in with other smart humans in a hybrid system. All we need is a little bit of an AI kick, a little bit of artificial intelligence, when mixed into a social group, can change the dynamics of the group for the better. Because the people are smart, the agent doesn't necessarily have to also be smart. So what my laboratory is studying is not the development of super smart AI to replace human cognition, like AlphaGo, for example, to play Go, or LLMs to pass the Turing test. We're not trying to develop super smart AI to replace human cognition. We are developing dumb AI to supplement human interaction. And all we need is the AI to act like a catalyst, like platinum in an organic reaction that lowers the activation energy. It's like a social catalyst. Let me give you some examples. So in one experiment we did, published a couple of years ago now, working with Maggie Trieger, who's currently at Notre Dame, and Brian Scazzolati, the roboticist at Yale, and others, and Sarah Sebo, who is at Chicago now, we created a little system of humanoid robots. So we had these little humanoid robots, and we put the humanoid robots into small groups of people, of 3 people. So there were 4 humanoids in the system, 1 robot and 3 real humans. And we gave them each a tablet computer, including the robot. And they had to play a little game that we made up, which is to lay railroad tracks from point A to point B. And each of them had to take a turn and pick a piece of track, like a curve that went this way, a curve that went that way, little straight pieces, and they had to sequentially assemble the track to connect point A to point B. And then we programmed the robots to occasionally make mistakes and to express vulnerability, or to tell what's known in English as dad jokes. I'm sure the same holds in Ukraine, the sort of embarrassing jokes that fathers tell that the kid's grown. So we made the robot tell dad jokes, like silly, stupid jokes. And then what we studied in these little systems was not how the humans responded to the robot, but what was the nature of the conversation between the humans all working together with the robot to solve the problem when we manipulated robot speech in this very trivial way. For example, in the humans, they played rounds of laying the track, and sometimes the robot would say, "A mistake was made after round 5." And other times the robot would say in a less robotic voice and in a more vulnerable way, "I'm sorry I made a mistake at the end of this round." And what we found is that when the robot expressed vulnerability, the amount of conversation between the humans, the equality of the conversation, and the character of the conversation were all changed. So we could enhance the dynamics of conversation among the humans by simple manipulations in robot speech. And the human interactions, the ability of the humans to work together, could be significantly affected by even trivial changes in the robot. Let me give you one other example, and then we've done many experiments like this. Let me give you an example with an online experiment. In this online experiment, which was just published last year, 2024, and along with Atsushi Ueshima and Matt Jones, what we did in this experiment is we made little networks of people. We have some software in my lab that allows us to create temporary artificial societies of real people, and tens of thousands of human subjects have signed up to do these experiments. And we took 2,000 of these people and we dropped them into little groups, and we gave the groups a challenge, which was to come up with original ideas, which to be creative. And then sometimes we dropped into these groups of humans, we dropped a couple of robots, a couple of AI agents, simple bots that manipulated the conversation, the communication between the humans. Let me explain to you what I mean by this. So coming up with original ideas is very difficult. And it turns out that groups of people, when they work together, are more innovative than a similar sized group of people that work separately. So when you put humans together, they can be creative and innovative. And that's an old result that's been known for a long time. So for example, when the fish hooks were invented in our history, and the wheel was only invented once, we believe, but fish hooks, with one exception potentially in South America, where the wheel was invented in a toy but never used in a big device. Fish hooks were invented multiple times, and each time they were invented, they were perfected by subsequent modifications by other people. So people work together to converge on an optimal design of a fish hook. So to try to model that system of innovation, what we did is we took 20,000 nouns in the English language that occupy what's known as a semantic space. So all of these nouns are similar to each other to a different extent. So cat is more similar to dog than either of those is to rocket. And so you can take all 20,000 nouns and you can array them in this semantic space according to how similar they are. And we picked one of those nouns at random, and we said this noun is the best idea, is the most valuable noun. And then all the other nouns that were nearer to it, you fell away in their point value until you were the farthest away from that noun. And now we dropped the people into a system and we said, okay, you guys work together and guess the noun that has the highest point value. So the people started guessing, and then they would be told the point value of their guess. So for example, if the noun that they were supposed to guess was dog and they guessed cat, the noun that was dog would have a point value of 20,000, would have a point value of 20,000, and dog was the highest value noun, and cat would be like 19,500. So people would be like, oh, we're close to dog. Let's guess dog next after cat. And if you guess rocket, you would get a point value of 10,000, which is far. You're like, I'm nowhere near it. And so the people would start to guess, and they would see their neighbors' guesses, and they would build on their neighbors' ideas. And we found that by adding some bots into this system, we could make the groups of people more creative. And all the bots did is they just transferred guesses from one region of the network to another region of the network, breaking down echo chambers in the system. Anyway, those are two examples, the humanoid robots and the online bots enhancing the creativity. So the humanoid robot example is enhancing the communication among people by simple modifications in robot speech. And the bot experiment I gave is enhancing the creativity of groups by facilitating their creativity with simple agents that are mixed into the system.
Yeah, fascinating. But there is something else going on as well. And before I start asking questions about Ukraine, I also want to start maybe ask my final questions about high-level concepts. So you just described this concept of catalyst, and you referred to some good things like creativity or cooperation. But I also know that you work on this duality of artificial intelligence, that sometimes the catalyst can bring a good outcome like cooperation or creativity, but sometimes it can also harm to societies. Can you reflect on that? What have you discovered in research? Yeah.
So, I mean, like anything that is invented, every technology is a dual-use technology, starting with fire, right? You can cook your food or you can burn the adjoining village down. You can use spear points to hunt animals for food, or you can use spear points to kill other people. So every technology is a dual-use technology, and these artificial intelligence systems are also a dual use, and they will see beneficent uses and they will see maleficent uses. And my laboratory has done some work on this. We, for example, in another experiment I didn't tell you about yet, we looked at how adding, this was work with Hiro Shirado at the Carnegie Mellon, who's brilliant. And in this work, we created, again, using our experimental platform, we created networks of people, and then we added some bots, and these people had to work together to cooperate to create what's known as a public good. A public good is something like a lighthouse that everyone benefits from, everyone has to contribute to. It's not a personal good. You can't, once the lighthouse is built, you can't stop others from using the light in the lighthouse. So everyone can see the light from the lighthouse. So, by the way, national defense is also a public good, right? So it's very tempting for people not to participate in the national defense and want everyone else to do that. And the problem then is if nobody participates, you get no national defense and everyone dies or is harmed. So, you know, this is a classic problem in the social sciences, the production of public goods, like a lighthouse or national defense or clean air is another example. Anyway, we put these groups of people into networks where they had to produce a public good. And then we secretly added some bots, and the bots were in the background rewiring the network. So they would occasionally broker introductions. And all they did, these little bots, was whenever someone was cooperative and nice, they would encourage other people to connect with that person. And whenever someone was a defector and didn't contribute to the public good, they would encourage the people that were connected to him to cut the ties. So they were just rewiring to sort of isolate for example, the people in Ukraine that might be embezzling funds, they should be ostracized. We don't want them in our society. They're not helping, you know. So cutting ties to people who are harming the public good is, it turns out, a very effective way to foster cooperation in our experiments. So these little bots, they don't have to be generous or saintly themselves. The bots don't actually have to do anything themselves. All they're doing, acting only, and I didn't mention this earlier, but all of our bots act only with local knowledge. This is the other important thing. It wouldn't be hard for a deity or a person with an omniscient vision on the network or the social system to intervene and start doing stuff. What we're interested in is developing agents, artificial intelligence agents, that can work autonomously only with local knowledge. So they don't have to see the whole system to know what's right. They just look around them at the nearby people. And so these little autonomous agents, just looking at the people near them, were able to broker introductions and move the whole system to be a cooperative. So they could help the system, or we could reverse engineer it and make those bots degrade cooperation and harm the system, and make that society collapse. So the same types of things that can be used beneficently can also be used maleficently.
Yeah, and you mentioned this specific terminology, dual-used technology, and you know, any kid in Ukraine now knows this because that's what people say on the streets, dual use, because you know there are so many drones that are flying around, and it's a very native concept now to people. They just use it whenever they have small talk or something like that. And there is a big debate that perhaps dual-use technology is actually the future of Ukrainian economic growth, because the drones, which are now used to deliver, let's say, a rocket or a bomb, can be in future used to deliver a shot of medicine.
There's no doubt that Ukraine will be a leader in drone technology after the war. I mean, all of the innovations, the know-how, the skills in these young people, the familiarity, the manufacturing capabilities, I think for sure Ukraine will have outward markets for that. I read that there was recently a Russian medic I just read an interview with him yesterday, I don't know where, on the BBC. He was a defector through Belarus. You may know this case. He was really upset at the loss of life, you know, the sort of cannon fodder attacks that the Russians were doing, the brutality in the Russian army, and he couldn't take it anymore. So he defected, I think, to France via Belarus, and he described what he was seeing on the other, on the other side. And one of the things he talked about is sometimes when they would overtake Ukrainian positions, he said, we were amazed to discover they were 3D printing the drones on the front and writing the software on the front. So, that capacity that has emerged, the Ukrainians have had to innovate, I think, in this way, given the superior numbers on the other side. I think is going to have ripple effects, after the war. Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. And, perhaps the next line of my questions, they will be more abstract because they not necessarily connect to your research, but I'm interested in your opinion because inevitably, we want to know the future of the world and the future of Ukraine. So we speculate a lot in our community, and maybe you can also speculate with us. Broadly, what do you think can be the applications of artificial intelligence in Ukraine today? I know that it's a big question, but we can break it down and talk about it in whatever direction you want to go. But, we can think about demographics, we can think about business, security. Clearly, artificial intelligence is a big, big thing now. So how would you even start thinking about it? What are the useful frameworks? What should we look at?
Well, that's a huge question, and my mind is flashing to all kinds of different concepts. The first concept is the old ideas about Luddites, the famous example of people who broke the looms, in England because they were losing their jobs because the fabric making was being automated. There's no stopping this technology. There is no question that artificial intelligence is here to stay. I think it's going to become like electricity. It's going to be kind of an enabling technology that undergirds everything. When electricity was first discovered, it was sort of kind of a curio. Oh my God, scientists discover electricity and you can move it through wires, and then eventually it becomes, a business. It's electricity. It's the source of power. And then now you take it for granted. It's in every device you use. I think as some of these tech billionaires have been arguing, the artificial intelligence is going to be like that. I think it's going to be in every aspect of our lives, and Ukraine as a part of the world will be affected by that. Now, Ukrainian scientists, of course, are known to be exceptionally good. I think you have many excellent computer scientists. You have many other great scientists. I think the war is going to have pushed you in some ways as well on certain types of applications in aviation, for example, and in others. But it's not going to be limited to that. I think artificial intelligence will be very broad. And so my first meta point is that there's no stopping it. The second meta point is that with all technologies, I think rather than stopping the technology, our focus should be on what I might call light regulation. And by this, I mean sort of democratic control. So how, it's like eventually human beings will be cloned. That technology exists for other mammals already. Maybe there's some people, maybe in China in some laboratory, humans have already been cloned and the world hasn't been told. The question is going to be, how do we regulate that technology and how do we find a voice? There may be some people who want it and so on. And so I think democratic control of AI is going to be a really important feature for how we mitigate some of its adverse effects in our society and optimize its beneficent effects in our society. Now, specifically in Ukraine, the demographic effects are going to be enormous. I don't know. I know that hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers have died. I don't know the number of deaths in Ukraine. But Ukraine is a much smaller population than Russia. So even if Ukraine has had half the deaths totally per capita, it would still be very high. So even if each Ukrainian death achieves 3 Russian deaths, the demographic impact, despite the combat impact of that is one thing, but the demographic impact on Ukraine is another. And so I think we have seen in many societies after wars in which many young men are dying. I know young women are fighting in Ukraine as well and also dying, but at proportionally lower numbers than the men. There's going to be and it's awful to discuss, but I think we can't escape it. And I'm sure people at KSC are thinking about it. What is the demographic impact and the human capital impact? And to what extent can AI help mitigate that? Can factories become more efficient after the war and need fewer workers because we're using some of these AI tools? Can universities become more efficient? Maybe it's not just factory workers we need fewer, maybe we need fewer university professors too, because you can have AI teachers. So I think AI is going to play a role in how Ukraine copes with the aftermath of the war. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
I do.
There is actually one kind of follow-up question that I thought about, because you're absolutely right. A lot of people in Ukraine do think about this. And currently, at this stage of the war and demographic shift, what we observe is what economists call structural gap in the labor market. In simple words, it means that there are some jobs, the market can offer jobs. And there are some people who are looking for a job, they're looking to be employed, but there is no connection between them, there is a gap, and this gap can be explained by lack of skills. So people who used to live in one area of Ukraine, they used to work in coal mines, they move to another part of Ukraine, to agriculture, and they don't have skills to work there. Or females, they are now taught to be tractor drivers because males were mobilized to army, something like that. So the speed of re-educating, re-skilling or upskilling is, in our opinion, is a key for economic prosperity in Ukraine. And building on that, I want to ask a question about, using artificial intelligence in learning process. I'm sure you have some experiments about that, or you have thought about that. Do you think that there are tools or systems or philosophy? How should we apply artificial intelligence, for better learning exercises, or how to get people of different ages to study? Do you want to say anything about that?
We haven't done too many experiments specifically on that. But I think that there are many tools, like these ChatGPT and like these large language models that could be used as like teaching assistants. So like take the truck driving example. You have one truck driver is trying to train 10 women to drive trucks, something they've never done before. That person may not necessarily be the most gifted teacher, or may not necessarily understand the confusion that his students are facing. But there could be an AI tool that he could use. Like he could say, I want you to, he could tell his AI tool, could you generate a couple of compelling videos of a person backing up a tractor trailer? And to back up a tractor trailer is really hard because you have to do counterintuitive things like go this way when you want the trailer to go that way. Could you create some videos for me? And he could then talk to the AI agent that would create a video and say, now, okay, remake that video, but make the person make the turn more swiftly and have the trailer go into the side of the road or something. And by just using words, this person without any video or film ability could literally create training videos that he could then say, okay, yeah, that's a good one. Or he could tell the AI agent to remake it and then use that to teach his students in real time, for example. So that's a way in which you using the AI agent, which doesn't know how to drive a truck actually, to help the human who knows how to drive a truck interact with other humans who wish to learn how to drive the truck, for example. So I have no doubt that there are many such ways that AI could be used with the problem you're describing in Ukraine. In my lab, we haven't studied that exactly, but we have studied, for instance, how AI can optimize the flow of information in groups of people trying to solve a problem. So the creativity example I gave earlier is one example, but there are other experiments that we've done that show that AI can be used. For example, we have a model system of evacuation. So when groups of people have to evacuate, our previous working example was a tsunami in Japan. How do a group of Japanese citizens flee correctly when a tsunami is coming? And the problem is you don't want either type 1 or type 2 errors. You don't want to repeatedly flee when the tsunami doesn't come, and you don't want to fail to flee when the tsunami does come. You want to get the optimal flight pattern in that situation. And of course, people are very skittish. You know, as soon as they see their neighbors fleeing, they're like, oh, I should flee. So how do you take advantage of that social contagion to only work when it's desirable, you know, when they actually should flee? So we've done some experiments with that, showing that AI can help in that type of situation. So by analogy, I think that AI systems will be able to help a little bit with the upskilling a problem that you're describing.
Thanks. And I see that there are already some questions in Q&A box. I encourage other people to ask questions there. Before going to this box, I want to ask my kind of final question. It's going to be a broad one, and then I'll turn to Q&A box. So I'm familiar with your book, Blueprint, which is, I would say, like a long investigation of human nature, starting from evolutionary laws to laws of society. And you have this argument that, you know, despite what many people believe and despite what we think, cooperation is good. And cooperation and creativity is very important for systems to sustain and to be prosperous. And eventually there is, you know, evolution, cooperation and altruism is something that inevitably brings good to our society. And my question, have you changed your mind recently with the new discoveries of artificial intelligence? Do you think that artificial intelligence is just something like a new trend that will follow everything you know about our societies, and it will be just in line with what you know about societies, or will it disrupt what we know about societies, and maybe these dynamics between good and bad contribution of technologies will change with time?
So what you're alluding to is my 2019 book, Blueprint, The Evolutionary Origins of a Good Society. It was actually going to have a Ukrainian translation. It's been translated into like, I don't know, 20 languages, and Ukrainian was next, but the war came, and so the publisher, I think, suspended operations. So I don't think there's a Ukrainian yet available. I don't know what the status of that translation is. I think, and in the last chapter of the book, I explicitly talk about this. I talk about how artificial intelligence, adding these non-human entities into social systems that act as if they were human, act socially, how might that affect fundamental human social dynamics? And there are two general principles there. First of all, my answer is not much. I think just like the printing press, which was a radical innovation, or the invention of cities. Now, some of those things did change us, by the way. The invention of cities 10,000 years ago changed the course of human evolution, and the invention of agriculture changed the course of human evolution. But many things didn't change. Many fundamental aspects of our sociality are unchanged. And I think AI, at least for sure in the short term, isn't going to change much. You know, when we invented the telephone, one of the stories I tell is, you know, if you could talk to my Greek grandmother, my parents are Greek and they immigrated to the United States in the 1960s. I still speak Greek. But so my Greek grandmother was born very poor in southern Greece. And if you could talk to her 100 years ago when she was 11, she died a long time ago, my grandmother did. But anyway, and ask her, when you were a little girl, how many friends did you have? And she would say I had 1 or 2 best friends, and there were 4 or 5 of us girls that hung out together. And if you ask my daughter, Lena, the same question when she was 11, you know, 10 years ago now, or 15 years ago now, she would have given you the same answer, even though she had an iPhone in her pocket. So there's something very deep and fundamental about human interactions, for example, our capacity to have a best friend and our ability to have a small group of people that we're very intimate with, that doesn't really vary across time and place. So in Blueprint, I make this argument that artificial intelligence isn't going to really change those things, first point. Second point, the impact of artificial intelligence in these hybrid systems and how humans respond to it will depend in part on what the human beings think the intentions of the robots are. So we've done some experiments where we decrypt. Sometimes people are interacting with these AI agents and they don't know they're AI agents. And other times they're interacting with AI agents and they do know that they are AI agents. And then we ask the people, what do you feel? How do you feel about interacting with these robots? And we find that actually the people don't mind if they feel the robots are trying to help them. So if the robots are seen as beneficent, people don't have a problem with having, AI agents. If they think that they're beneficent, they're especially angry. So think about, I don't know if you have this in Ukraine, but in the United States, we have this irritating thing now. When you go to a grocery store, you can either check out with a human, who scans your groceries and takes your change and bags your groceries, or you can go to a little automated scanning machine and interact with the machine. And there are a lot of interesting things about that example. First of all, how does the introduction of that machine change the human-human interaction? So if you're a human clerk and right next to you is a machine that's doing your job, what do? Do you feel demeaned that a machine is doing your job and so now you degrade your performance and emulate a machine? Or do you feel like, wait a minute, I'm a human, I'm going to smile at the person and I'm going to accentuate my human abilities to distinguish myself from the machine? So the purchaser now, the human-human interaction, you see, once again, has been modified by the existence of that machine. First point. Second point, the addition of that bot is going to change the human-human interactions, but the bot itself, whether the human purchaser is angry or accepts the bot, depends on how good the bot does its job. If it's accurate and speedy, I think it's great that the supermarket's automated. I don't have a problem with, I can choose a human or I can choose a machine. It's fine. But if the bot is inaccurate and slow and difficult to use, then I get angry, right, at the bot. So I think a lot depends on whether the perception is that this agent is helping us or not. And I think that is going to be a key thing that affects our response to these artificial agents in our systems.
Yeah.
I want to say one other thing. So you alluded to my book Blueprint, and in the book I talk about the evolutionary origins of a good society, and I talk about how natural selection has shaped us, endowed us with all these wonderful qualities like love and friendship and the ability to cooperate and social learning and teaching. We teach each other things. These are all magnificent things that natural selection has endowed us with. But it's important to remember that we can use these abilities for good or for evil. In other words, the Nazis were cooperative too. They cooperated just fine with each other, and they built a war machine, right? An awful war machine. So while these qualities are good, the purpose, the ends to which they can be put are not also necessarily good. And it's a very important distinction to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for this thought. And I will check the box with questions from our audience. And there are some questions that go specifically to Nicholas, some questions that go to both of us, and I will read them out loud. So Thomas Remington, who is at Davis Center, and I think he plans to visit KC in person in the fall. He has a question to you, Nicholas, that how much choice do we have over the effects of artificial intelligence on labor markets? How can humans, like government, business managers, decide to adopt forms of artificial intelligence that complement the work of humans as opposed to forms that substitute for human workers? So, can you reflect on that?
Well, it depends on who the humans are. The people manufacturing these AI agents, I think, will be quite happy to have the AI agents be used in all kinds of ways. The perspective of the citizen on the street, the government bureaucrat, the manufacturer of the agents, they'll all be different. And this is what I was talking about earlier with democratic control. I think we're going to have a conversation like that. I don't think we can really I don't think we can stop the development of these tools, and I'm not even sure we should try to stop the development of these tools. But I do think we should try to find rational ways to regulate these tools. Just like, for instance, gain-of-function research for viruses or nuclear weapons or any other kind of dangerous technology. There are always going to be people, whether good actors or bad actors, who are playing in that sandbox. And the question is, can we promulgate rules of transparency and regulation that keep the good and to stop the bad? So I don't think, and I think AI will be a substitute. Yes, I think I can already see it. I mean, I'm very worried, for example, in my teaching. It's been funny, when I'm 62, when I started teaching in my early 30s, about 30 years ago, I never really liked exams and tests. I didn't like them when I was a student. I felt like they don't really capture the kind of fluid intelligence I wanted my students to be able to manifest. And so I was one of those people who very rapidly stopped administering multiple choice tests or simple tests with short answers. And I tried to move my students to write essays, or I gave take-home exams where I gave big, hard questions to the students and they had to write difficult synthetic answers so I could evaluate their quality of mind. And so that the writing could help advance their own thinking. They struggled to answer this question, how do you produce social capital? That's a hard question to answer. So, but now with large language models, over the last 2 years, it's become clear. And a further thing that's happened is students have stopped reading. So in the United States, as we've increasingly emphasized the recruitment at our elite universities of students who are either activists or members of clubs over students who are really good students and want to learn, right? So we have shifted the entry criteria from performs well on tests, is a very good student, to has a broad set of skills, is a violinist and a chess player and set up a program to redress the adverse effects of some public intervention. All of those are admirable things, don't get me wrong, but we've shifted the balance to recruiting students who aren't necessarily have as their primary focus learning. So they don't read anymore. The students aren't reading the materials that are assigned. And I've noticed that the amount of readings I've assigned has gone down over the last 20 years. I used to give, 300 pages a week of reading, and then it became 200. Now it's like 160 pages. It's difficult to get them to read. So here's the predicament I'm in. Students aren't reading as much, and I put a lot of work in selecting the readings. I can't give them writing assignments because they're all using large language models and cheating, to my eye, basically. So I'm now going to be reverting, I think, I'm on sabbatical right now, so next year when I go back to the classroom, to a medieval form of evaluation of students. I'm going to bring back oral exams where I have the students, voir dire, where I'm going to have them, come and talk to me about the readings and about their learning so I can evaluate if they learn, which is very labor intensive for the professor. And I'm going to now bring them back into the classroom and give them really persnickety little short answer questions to just check, did they do the reading, and now both of those things feel awful to me. Like I don't want to do either of those things, but I am being compelled by the technology to change, to become atavistic and adopt an old-fashioned forms of evaluation of students.
Yeah. Well, and still people are quite interested in this topic of regulation. So there is another question which, I think you have answered it a bit, but people are interested in details about regulations. So how the regulation can actually look like? Can a national attempt at regulation make a difference for the global phenomenon? And is it realistic to think that any existing multinational organization could take up this charge?
I mean, I think the problem in the world today is we have, to my eye, a lot of incipient fascism, if not frank fascism, in many formerly democratic countries, let alone non-democratic countries around the world. We have a lot of polarization. We have a lot of dissension. I think the world is a more dangerous place than it was 10 years ago, with less desire for and more increasing suspicion, even in the United States, of the post-Second World War order of international organizations, whether it's the World Trade Organization or the World Health Organization or the United Nations or multilateral treaties on climate change, all of these sorts of, Pax Americana things that were meant to get countries with dissimilar interests to somehow work together on global concerns. And so, unfortunately, we are at a moment when we are particularly unable to work internationally on some of these things. And yet, I think artificial intelligence does require exactly that kind of approach. I think that these AI agents will become progressively more powerful. And I can imagine a kind of situation in which we have a kind of global test ban treaty kind of analogy, a kind of, the regulation, the way we regulate nuclear weapons, or the way we attempt to respond to climate change, which are both global threats. I think those would be models for how we have to confront the rise of AI. Now, whether at this particular moment in history we can deploy those kinds of international approaches, I think it's hard. But I think the tide will change. I mean, I'm not a doomster. Like, I don't think the world is going to end. I mean, I think we are going through a very bad patch. Here I'm just reminded of my conversations with my Greek father, who is in his late 80s. And whenever I get very upset about what's happening, whether it's the COVID pandemic or it's the war in Ukraine or the rise of the Communist Party of China or some of these, developments which are concerning to my view, my dad lived through the Nazi occupation of Athens. He was a little boy when the Nazis marched into Athens. And that's his perspective, So he thinks, yes, things are hard, but we've seen hard things before. He has a different perspective, I think, than my children who were raised in the United States during peace and prosperity, for whom this is very, very bewildering, my adult children, So I remain an optimist about where humanity is going. And although I acknowledge there are ups and downs, and we are at a sort of down at the moment.
Yeah, thanks. And I will continue with the questions from Thomas Remington. I think I can take the second part of his question because it's more specifically related to Ukraine. So the question is whether these new skills in technologies and drones, whether they can be how readily will Ukraine be able to convert that knowledge to civilian use to make Ukraine's economy more prosperous and productive? My answer would be that, in a split of a second, that to the best of my knowledge, people who are engaged with technology development and production of technologies and usage of technologies in Ukraine are very much connected to different industries and sectors. So people who work with military, they also work with other sectors at the same time. There is a very quick and rapid exchange of knowledge and knowledge transfer. Even our example, Kyiv School of Economics, is an institution which has the name economics in its title. And nevertheless, last year we launched a master program in engineering, which is focused specifically on aerodynamics and building drones. So this is a signal how fast the markets develop here and how fast people in responding to these new needs. And I think the only thing that prevents, Ukrainian markets from growing would be what Professor Christakis mentioned, is an issue of regulation. So there will be some regulation, and I think it will significantly impact, the outcome of economic growth. Whether the government will be strict or not strict, what about European integration, things like that. It's more like a political economy than labor market economy questions.
I have a former student, Andrei Liskovich, who's Ukrainian. I was his PhD advisor when I was still at Harvard, and he was at Harvard. And he moved, like many Ukrainians abroad, when the Russians invaded. He very patriotically moved back to Ukraine immediately and was trying to set up supply chains, I think already for drone components, literally somehow knew, I mean, in a way that Andre is very smart, knew that this was going to be an important development early on. So I think, there's tremendous human capital in Ukraine and more, a greater commitment to democratic norms and I would even say an increasing commitment. So I'm optimistic. I mean, it's hard to predict what will happen with a war, especially with a change in the American administration. But I still think we're going to see with an awful and tremendous loss of life, which breaks my heart. And by the way, all these Russian conscripts, I mean, these are young men being conscripted from nowhere and sent to die. I mean, they didn't deserve to die either, candidly. I think the post-war period will be okay for Ukraine, but I don't know when that will come, and I don't know how much more suffering is going to be required.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with your evaluation here. And there is another question which partially touches on the topic we discussed. We discussed artificial intelligence in learning and also teaching others, and you provided some examples from research. But the question here by Yuria Melchenko is very specific to your campus experience. What is your personal experience, or maybe broader, on what is happening on your campus of using artificial intelligence in learning and teaching?
Well, I can't really speak to its use in learning. In terms of teaching, I haven't used it yet. Some of the grad students and postdocs that do science in my lab are using AI systems to write computer code for some of our experiments, to help generate illustrations for different kinds of things we're doing. I prohibited them from using it to write our scientific papers because I think that's plagiarism. It's still too early for me to even understand how we would use LLMs to do our writing. I've been approached by a couple of entities, commercial firms, about creating a AI Nicholas. A bunch of people have done that. Reid Hoffman just released an AI agent where you can interact with Reid's AI twin. I think Steve Pinker also has like a kind of Pinkerbot kind of thing. I've been thinking about doing that for the last couple of years. Actually, I've had some opportunities and haven't yet done it. Either, so the public at large could talk to Nicholas Christakis, who would be on 24 hours a day. I could feed in all of the things I've ever written. Or on campus, some people are beginning to think about, the AI professor. So instead of having office hours with me personally, if you had simple questions about the readings or about the test or whatever, you could just talk to Nicholas AI. And I would have fed in all of my teaching materials and all of my other writings, which are, extensive now after all these years. Like this video, for example, in which I've said quite a few things I've never said before, would be fed in and would entrain the agent. I think that's coming. But, you get a kind of Monty Python quality to this because, if the students are using AI to learn and the professors are using AI to teach, then we're just going to have two AI agents talking to each other. I mean, where's I'm teaching the student. I should be talking to the student, not, my agent should be talking to his or her agent. So, I think it's not just science fiction. It's almost comedy, some of the scenarios we can imagine. For example, people are thinking about using AI to compose their emails. And I'm beginning to get a lot of clearly AI composed emails from people around the world for whom English is clearly a second language. And these emails are composed in a very Baroque, grammatically correct, like no errors, which is weird. Like a person who is Chinese or Pakistani, not Pakistani, a Chinese or a German. Oh, German is not a good example either. Let's say sort of a non-Anglophone country, a person from a non-Anglophone country who grew up speaking one language for whom English was a second language. Sometimes they write perfect English, but usually there are a few mistakes in an email that they send you. These emails have no mistakes ever, and they have a kind of Baroque, flowery, over-the-top kind of recognition of what I've done that makes me guess, probably accurately, they've been written by AI. And so some people said, okay, so people are using AI to write their email. Isn't that great? And other people saying, well, why don't you use AI to respond to email? I get, like everyone else, I get lots of emails. So then we might have this world in which one AI agent is making up bullshit, another AI agent is responding bullshit. I mean, it's ridiculous, So, so on campus, I don't know how much AI is being used for teaching yet. There are use cases which I think are valuable. I mentioned a couple: writing code and generating training videos and illustrations. How much more broadly it gets used in a way that I would regard as legitimate, I don't yet know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I can share that sometimes I use artificial intelligence for the same reason, not to write my email, but at least to polish my email. And the way we approach it, and sometimes tell to our students that this is a new opportunity to learn about frameworks and to learn about other cultures. So for instance, people in other cultures, in a business culture or another country, they can use another language. So why not to adapt your email to the typical language of an American professor? So imagine it is an elevator pitch. How would you change my email to make it sound like an elevator pitch?
Yes.
And it helped me in my own learning process to understand different types of cultures. And there is a funny example that I sometimes use to my students, that a big part of my job is to mitigate conflicts, and sometimes colleagues, they start fighting in an email, and I want to resolve it. And I write my own email, and I think that I'm so great because, I'm such a great manager. And then I ask ChatGPT to evaluate my email, and it says, well, it sounds a bit toxic. It will not resolve the problem. It will only add to the problem. You should be more specific in your criticism and propose more specific action items. So yeah, sometimes I double check. And I think it's an interesting point that sometimes it's about social skills. Sometimes we lack social skills. We don't understand other cultures. We don't always know how to respond to a specific situation. And we can use this tool just to learn about patterns. Sometimes it's difficult to see patterns, and this tool helps us to see patterns. And as you said, it's a big challenge how even to think about artificial intelligence models from the perspective of plagiarism and academic integrity. As you also mentioned, there is no way of stopping this technology, and some light democratic control should be, and that's what we try to do at Kyiv School of Economics. We ask students to report whenever they use it. We ask them to submit prompts, but we try to limit it, and we say, like, if this is about coding, yes, you can use chat, but please submit your prompt. And for actual some other exercises, we ask students to give more oral presentations or to sometimes even handwrite things. So we try to make sure that they understood the reading and they can express themselves. So indeed, we spent a lot of time, trying to integrate these tools in our teaching curriculum. Yeah, it's a big challenge to academia all around the world. And I received some questions in my personal chat, because there are also people who watch us on YouTube and people who want to ask questions directly, so they send questions to me directly. So there is a question, I will read it out loud. One has to believe that Russia, with its extensive disinformation industry, is mobilizing artificial intelligence to have an even more disruptive effect than before. Is there any way we can somehow inoculate people from reacting to the disinformation by exploiting the idea that it is bot-driven and magnified by AI? And there is a second point. What does your research tell us about how we can push human-to-human interaction in a positive way, especially in increasingly virtual world? Yes, I think the first part is really fascinating question.
Well, I have some people in my lab. I mean, here, David Rand at MIT has done a lot of work on the use of AI agents to reduce conspiracy theories and to affect the flow of misinformation. In my lab, there's a postdoc named Vaibhav Krishna, who is going to be returning to Switzerland, I think, soon. Vaibhav has been very interested in using bots to have what we call decentralized policing. So how can you counteract the misinformation bots by having like traffic cops that slow down the flow of falsehoods? I wouldn't want some kind of omnipotent entity to attempt to control speech completely. because I'm very much in favor of free expression. So I wouldn't want to give anyone the power to decide what I can see and what I can read. But I would like to give democratic control. I would like human beings to be endowed with the ability to upvote and downvote things that are lies, to like the community notes that's on Twitter can be very effective, where people will say, wait a minute, this is a falsehood. So I think there are ways to use AI tools to help. And there's a wonderful experiment that was done by a guy at NYU, and I'm blocking on his name right now, where years ago he did an experiment in which he identified people that were saying racist things to other people. So let's say you and I, Tymofii, are interacting online, and then Johnny joins the conversation and says something awful and racist to you. Like, he's not our friend, but he's joining the conversation, and he makes some kind of really nasty comments to you. What they did is they identified when this was happening, and then they had another agent, a bot, talk to Johnny and say, hey, Johnny, you should be aware Tymofii is a real person, and his feelings might have been hurt by what you just did. And then they manipulated the appearance of that agent that was talking to Johnny. For example, did that person have many followers? Were they high status or few followers? Were they low status? And did they have a white avatar or a black avatar? And then by manipulating the appearance, the status and race of the bot that was talking to Johnny to get him to stop saying racist things to you, Tymofii, they found that just cultivating an insight that there's a human being that you're insulting dramatically reduced racism online. So that experiment, which was published a few years ago, the person was a political scientist at NYU, I can't remember his name right now, showed that it's possible to have very simple bots that could join and intervene in conversations. And, like, just say, that was a Russian bot that spoke to you just now. We maintain a list of Russian bots. We are some official trusted entity, and we are maintaining a list of Russian bots, and that was a Russian bot. And you might want to report them and block them. I think, and then the person has the choice. They can decide, I believe the KSC, they're credible, and they're telling me this is a Russian bot. And so I'm going to do what they say. And I'm going to block and report this other entity. And enough people respond to KSC's intervention, and then maybe Twitter will, block that, centrally take that bot offline or whatever. But the Russians and the Chinese are using our technology, our social media technology, and in the West, our commitment to free expression against us, and are absolutely sowing misinformation and dissension. And I think we're going to need partly technical solutions and partly educational solutions, just like we train the elderly not to fall for scams, when they get a text message or a phone call to reveal their bank information. We're going to have to train young people, slowly but surely, not to fall for misinformation. And someone in the chat just helped me remember that the young political scientist who did that project on the anti-racism bots was Kevin Munger, who actually came and presented the work to my lab years ago, and we thought it was really inventive.
Yeah, and there was no artificial intelligence used now. We just Googled the name and we provided it to the chat. Just on the way. Fantastic. So, look, we still have 10-15 minutes. If someone wants to ask a question, you have your chance. I know that there were some debates in the chat, but mostly about ethical concerns about the war, but there was nothing specific to our conversation, I think. Yeah, it seems like there are no other questions in the chat, and we used our time well. I want to say thank you to Nicholas. It's been a fantastic talk. I think it's the best part of my job. I can lure in smart people, my favorite scholars, and just ask questions that I want to ask. And I encourage the audience to follow our social media of Khoury and Davis Center. We will post more announcements, and there will be more meetings like that, uniting Davis, Khoury, and Kyiv School of Economics, inviting more scholars and talking about significant questions in the fields of history, political science, sociology, and others. Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, Tymofii. Thank you, Nicholas, for a really, really fascinating hour. Obviously, just sort of breaking the surface of what there is to understand about this technology and how it might be used. I posted in the chat that our next event in the Kyiv Connection series will be held on March 3rd, and it's called War Through Historians' Eyes. We hope that you'll join us. You can click on the link and register for that. But until then, thank you very much for coming, for joining us today, and thank you, of course, to our speakers. Have a great afternoon.